In the kitchen. "The time has come," my grandmother said. "The great moment has arrived. Are you ready, my darling?" It was exactly 7:30. Bruno was in the bowl finishing that fourth banana. "Hang on," he said. "Just a few more bites." "No," my grandmother said. "We've got to go." She picked him up and held him tight in her hand. She was very tense and nervous. I'd never seen her like that before. "I'm going to put you both in my handbag now," she said, "but I shall leave the clasp undone." She popped Bruno in first. I waited, clutching the little bottle to my chest. "Now you," she said. She picked me up and gave me a kiss on the nose. "Good luck, my darling." "Oh, by the way, you do realize you have a tail, don't you?" "A what?" I said. "A tail, a very long and curly tail." "Well, I must say it never occurred to me," I said. "Good gracious, so I have. I can see it now. I can actually move it. It's rather grand now, isn't it?" "I mention it only because it might come in useful when you're climbing about in the kitchen," Grandmama said. "You can curl it around things and hook it to things, and you could swing from it and lower yourself from the ground to the ground from very high places." "I wish I'd known this before," I said. "I could have been practicing." "Too late now," my grandmother said. "We've got to go." She popped me into her handbag with Bruno, and all at once I took up my usual perch in the small side pocket so that I could poke my head out and see what was going on. My grandmother picked up her walking stick, and out she went into the corridor to the lift. She pressed the button, and the lift came up, and she got in. There was no one in with us. "Listen," she said, "I won't be able to talk to you much once we're in the dining room. If I do, people think I'm going crazy talking to myself." The lift reached the ground floor and stopped with a jerk. My grandmother walked out of it and crossed the lobby of the hotel and entered the dining room. It was a huge room with gold decorations on the ceiling and big mirrors around the walls. The regular guests always had their tables reserved for them, and most of them were already in their places starting to eat their suppers. Waiters were buzzing all around the place, carrying dishes and plates. Our table was a small one beside the right-hand wall about halfway down the room. My grandmother made her way to it and sat down. Peeping out of the handbag, I could see the very center of the room. 2 long tables were there, not yet occupied. Each one of the long tables carried a notice fixed on a very silver sort of stick. The notices said, "These tables reserved for members of the RSPCC," from the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. So there's 2 very long tables in the middle of the dining room where no one's seating at yet, and those are reserved for witches. My grandmother looked toward the long tables and said nothing. She unfolded her napkin and spread it over the handbag on her lap. Her hand gently slid under the napkin and took hold of me. With the napkin covering me, she lifted me up to her face and whispered, "I'm about to put you on the floor under the table. The tablecloth reaches almost to the ground so no one will see you. Do you have the bottle?" "Yes," I whispered back. "I'm ready, Grandmama." Just then a waiter in a black suit came over and stood by our table. I could see his legs from under the napkin, and as soon as I heard his voice, I knew who he was. His name was William. "Good evening, madam," he said to my grandmother. "Where's the little gentleman tonight?" "Oh, my grandson's not feeling very well. He's staying up in his room," said grandmother. "I'm sorry to hear that," said William. "Today there is green pea soup to start with, and for the main course you shall have a choice of either grilled fillet of sole or roast lamb." "Oh, pea soup and the lamb for me, please. But don't hurry at it, William. I'm in no rush tonight." "Of course, madam," William said, and he went away. My grandmother pretended she had dropped something as she bent down. She slid me out from under the napkin onto the floor and whispered, "Go, darling, go." Then she straightened up again. I was on my own now. I stood clasping the little bottle. I knew exactly where the door to the kitchen was. I had to go about halfway around the enormous dining room to reach it. Here goes, I thought, and like a flash, I skidded out from under the table and made for the wall. I had no intention of going across the middle of the dining room floor. It was far too risky. My plan was to cling close to the wall and skirt around the outside all the way around the room until I reached the kitchen door. I ran. Oh, how I ran! I don't think anyone saw me. They were all too busy eating. But to reach the door leading to the kitchen, I had to cross the main entrance to the dining room. I was just about to do this when in poured a great flood of females. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the bottle. At first, I only saw the shoes and ankles of these women who were surging in at the door. When I glanced up a bit higher, I knew who they were. They were the witches coming to dinner. I waited until they had all passed by me, then dashed on toward the kitchen door. A waiter opened it to go in. I nipped in and after him, I hid behind a big garbage bin on the floor. I stayed there for several minutes, just listening to all the talk and the racket. By golly, what a place that kitchen was. The noise, the steam, the clatter of pots and pans, the cooks all shouting, the waiters all rushing in and out from the dining room, yelling the food orders to the cooks. 4 soups, 2 lambs, 2 fish for table 28, 3 apple pies, 2 strawberry ice creams for number 17. Stuff like that, being shouted all the time. Not far above my head, there was a handle sticking out from one side of the garbage bin. Still clutching the bottle, I gave a leap, turned a somersault in the air, and caught hold of the handle with the end of my tail. Suddenly I was there swinging to and fro, up and down, and it was terrific. I loved it. This, I told myself, is how a trapeze artist in the circus must feel as he goes swishing through the air, high up into the circus tent. The only difference was that his trapeze could only swing backwards and forwards. My trapeze, my tail, could swing me in any direction I wanted. Perhaps I would become a circus mouse after all. Just then, a waiter came in with a plate in his hand, and I heard him saying, "The old hag on table 14 says the meat is too tough. She wants another portion." One of the cooks said, "Give me your plate." I dropped to the floor and peeped around the garbage bin. I saw the cook scrape the meat off the plate and slap another piece on. Then he said, "Come on, boys. She's complaining about her cooking. Let's give her some gravy." He carried the plate around to everyone in the kitchen. And do you know what they did? Every one of those cooks and kitchen boys spit on the old lady's new plate. "See how she likes it now," said the cook, handing the plate back to the waiter. Quite soon enough, another waiter came in and shouted, "Everyone in the big RSPCC party wants the soup." That's when I started sitting up and taking notice. He's talking about the witches, I thought. I was all ears now. I edged a bit farther around the garbage bin so I could see everything that was going on in the kitchen. A man with a tall white chef hat, who must have been the head chef, shouted, "Put the soup for the big party of women in this large silver soup tureen." This is good news. The head cook said, since all of the women of the RSPCC want the special kind of soup, the pea soup, they're going to make them their own giant, tureen of it, a big pot of it. So if the narrator can get the mouse maker formula into just that pot of soup will only be served to the witches. So that's a good solution to his problem. I saw the head chef place a huge silver basin on the wooden side bench that ran along the whole length of the kitchen against the opposite wall. Into that silver basin is where the soup is going, I thought. So that's where the stuff in my little bottle must go as well. I noticed that high up near the ceiling above the side bench, there was a long shelf crammed with saucepans and frying pans. So high up, almost near the ceiling, there was a shelf that went the whole way around the room, and that's where they stored all the extra pots and pans. If I can somehow clamber up onto that shelf, I thought, then I got it made. I will be directly above this silver basin. But first, I must somehow get across to the other side of the kitchen and then up the middle shelf. A great idea came to me. Once again, I jumped up and hooked my tail around the handle of the garbage bin. Then, hanging upside down, I began to swing. Higher and higher I swung. I remember the trapeze artist in the circus I had seen last Easter, the way he got the trapeze swinging higher and higher and higher, and then he had let go and gone flying through the air. So at just the right moment, I swung. At the top of my swing, I let go with my tail and went soaring across the kitchen, making a perfect landing on the middle shelf. By golly, I thought, what marvelous things a mouse can do, and I'm only a beginner. No one had seen me. They were all far too busy with their pots and pans. From the middle shelf, I somehow managed to shinny up a little water pipe in the corner. And in no time at all, I was up on the very top shelf, just under the ceiling, among all the saucepans and frying pans. I knew that no one could possibly see me up there. It was a super position, and I began working my way along the shelf until I was directly above the big empty silver basin that they were going to pour the soup into. I put down my bottle and I unscrewed the top and crept to the edge of the shelf and quickly poured all that I had straight into the silver basin below. The next moment, one of the cooks came along with a gigantic saucepan of steaming split pea green soup, and he poured the whole lot of it into the silver basin. He put the lid on the basin and said, "Soup for the big party, all ready to go out." The waiter arrived and carried the silver basin away. done it. Even if I never got back alive to my grandmother, the witches were still going to get the mouse maker. I left the empty bottle behind a large saucepan and began working my way back along the top shelf. It was so much easier to move now without the weight of the bottle. I began using my tail more and more. I swung from the handle of one saucepan to the handle of another, all the way down along that top shelf, while far below, cooks and waiters were all bustling about, kettles were steaming, pans were spluttering, and pots were boiling. And I thought to myself, oh boy, this is the life. What fun it is to be a mouse doing an exciting job like this. And I kept right on swinging. I swung most marvelously from handle to handle. And I was enjoying myself so much that I completely forgot that I was in full view of anyone in the kitchen who might happen to glance upwards. What came next happened so quickly I had no time to save myself. I heard a man's voice yelling, "A mouse! Look at that dirty little mouse!" And I caught a glimpse below me of a white-coated figure in a tall white hat. And then there was a flash of steel as the carving knife whizzed through the air. There was a shoot of pain at the end of my tail. And suddenly I was falling and falling head first toward the floor below. So he was swinging from pan to pan with his tail. He was so relieved that his plan had worked, that he had gotten the mouse maker into the witch's soup, that he was kind of being not too careful. And one of the cooks looked up and saw him and took his large carving knife and went whoosh, and he cut the narrator's tail, the end of it, right off, and the narrator is falling. His tail is bleeding and he's falling toward the floor. Even as I fell, I knew what had just happened. I knew that the tip of my tail had been cut off, that I was about to crash to the floor, and that everyone in the kitchen would be after me. "A mouse!" they were shouting. "A mouse! A mouse! Catch it quick!" I hit the floor and jumped up and ran for my life. All around me there was big black boots going stomp, stomp, stomp. And I dodged around them and ran, twisting and turning, dodging and swerving across the kitchen floor. "Get it!" they were shouting. "Kill it! Stomp on it!" The whole floor seemed to be full of black boots stomping away at me, and I dodged and swerved and twisted and turned, and then in sheer desperation, hardly knowing what I was doing, wanting only a place to hide, I ran up the pant leg of one of the cooks and clung to his sock. "Hey!" the cook shouted. "Jeepers creepers, he's gone up my trouser leg. Hold on, boys, I'll get him this time." The man began slapping at this trouser leg. And now I really was going to get smashed if I didn't move quickly. There was only one way to go up, or to get out, and that was to go up. I dug my little claws into the hairy skin of that man's leg, and I scuttled upwards, higher and higher, past the calf, past his knee, onto his thigh. "Holy smokes!" the man yelled. "It's going all the way up! It's going right up my leg!" I heard shrieks of laughter coming from the other cooks, but I can promise you I wasn't laughing. I was running for my life. The man's hands were slapping all around me. He was jumping up and down as though he was standing on hot bricks, and I kept climbing and dodging, and very soon I had reached the very top of his trouser legs, up by his waist, and there was nowhere else to go. "Help! Help! Help!" the man was screaming. "He's in my knickers!" That's like his underwear. "It's running around! Please get it out! Someone get it out!" "Take off your trousers, you silly slob!" someone else shouted. "Put on your pants, we'll soon catch him." I was in the middle of the man's trousers now, in the place where the two trouser legs meet, and the zip begins. It was dark and awfully hot in there. I knew I had to keep going. I dashed onward, round the top of the other leg, and then I went straight down like greased lightning and came out the bottom of the second leg in the pants. Once again I was on the floor. I heard the stupid cook still shouting, "He's in my trousers! Get it out! Someone please help me! Please stop laughing!" I caught a glimpse of the entire kitchen staff crowding around him and laughing their heads off. No one saw the little brown mouse that had flown out the other side of the pants, going across the floor and diving into the sack of potatoes. I burrowed down in among the dirty potatoes and I held my breath. The cook must have started taking his trousers right off, because now they were shouting, "It's not in there! That's no mouse, you silly twerp!" "He was! I swear it was in there!" the man said. "You've never had a mouse in your trousers. You don't know what it feels like." The fact that a tiny little creature like me had caused such a commotion among a bunch of grown-up men gave me a little bit of a happy feeling. I couldn't help but smile in spite of the pain in my tail. I stayed where I was until I was quite sure they had forgotten about me. Then I crept out of the potatoes and cautiously poked my tiny head over the edge of the sack. Once again, the kitchen was all a bustle with cooks and waiters rushing about everywhere. I saw the waiter who had come in earlier with the complaint about the tough meat coming in again. "Hey, boys," I asked the old hag if she liked the new bit of meat any better. She said it was perfectly delicious. She said it was real tasty. I had to get out of the kitchen and back to my grandmother. There was only one way to do this. I must make a dash clear across the floor and out through the door behind me. I stayed quite still, watching for my chance. My tail was hurting terribly. I curled it round so as to have a look at it. About 2 inches of it were missing, cut off, and it was bleeding quite a lot. There was a waiter loading up a batch of plates full of pink ice cream. He had a plate in each hand and 2 more balanced on each arm. He went towards the door. He pushed it open with his shoulder. I leapt out of the sack of potatoes and went across that kitchen floor and into the dining room like a streak of light, and I did not stop running until I was safe underneath my grandma's table. It was lovely to see my grandmother's feet again, in those old-fashioned black shoes with their straps and buttons. I shinnied up one of her legs and landed on her lap. "Hello, Grandmama," I whispered. "I'm back. I did it. I poured the whole bottle into their soup." Her hand came down and caressed me. "Well done, my darling," she whispered back. "Well done, you. They are at this very moment eating that soup." Suddenly she withdrew her hand. "You're bleeding," she said. "My darling, what's happened to you?" "One of the cooks cut off my tail with a carving knife," I whispered. "It hurts." "Well, let me look at it," she said. She bent her head and examined my tail. "Oh, you poor little thing," she whispered. "I'm going to bandage it up with my handkerchief. That'll stop the bleeding." She fished a small lace-edged handkerchief out of her bag, and this she somehow managed to wrap around the end of my tail. "You'll be all right now," she said. "Just try to forget about it." "Did you really manage to pour the whole bottle into their soup?" "Every drop," I answered. "Do you think you can put me where I can watch them?" "Yes," she answered. "My handbag is on my own empty chair beside me. I'm going to pop you in there now, and you can peep out as long as you're careful not to be seen. Bruno is in there as well, but take no notice of him. I gave him a roll to eat, and that's been keeping him busy for a while." Her hand closed around me, and I was lifted off her lap, transferred to the handbag. "Hello, Bruno," I said. "This is a great roll," he said, nibbling away in the bottom of the bag, "but I wish there was butter on it." I peered over the top of the handbag. I could see the witches quite clearly sitting at their 2 long tables in the center of the room. They had finished their soup now, and the waiters were clearing away the plates. My grandmother had lit up one of her disgusting black cigars and was puffing away. All of us in the summer holiday guests in this room were babbling away and tucking into their suppers. About half of them were old people with walking sticks, but the other half were plenty of families, with a husband, a wife, and several children. They were all well-to-do people. You had to be, if you wanted to stay in the Hotel Magnificent. "That's her, Grandmama," I whispered. "That's the Grand High Witch." "I know," my grandmother whispered back. "She's the tiny one, sitting at the head of the nearest table." "She could kill you," I whispered. "She could kill anyone in this room with her white-hot sparks." "Look out," my grandma whispered. "The waiter's coming." I popped down out of sight, and I heard William saying, Your roast lamb, madam. And which vegetable would you like, peas or carrots?" "Well, carrots, please," said my grandmother, "but no potatoes." I heard the carrots being dished out. There was a pause, and then my grandmother's voice was whispering, "It's all right, he's gone." I popped my little head up. "Surely no one will notice my tiny little head sticking out like this," I whispered. "No, I don't suppose they will. My problem is, I gotta try to talk to you without moving my lips." "Well, you're doing beautifully," I said. "I've counted the witches," she said. "There aren't nearly as many as you thought. You were just guessing, weren't you, when you said 200? "Well, it seemed like 200 witches," I answered. "I was wrong too," my grandmother said. "I thought there were a lot more witches in England." "How many are there?" I asked. 84, she answered. "There were 85, but one of them got fried," I reminded her. At that moment, I caught sight of Mr. Jenkins, Bruno's father, heading straight for our table. "Look out, Grandmama," I whispered. "Here comes Bruno's father." That's the end of this long chapter.